My name is Lacey. I'm a 39-year-old mother of two beautiful children, a 6-year-old and a 17-year-old. I'm presently giving testimony for the experiences I have had regarding a housing system that has failed me amongst many, many others. I left home aged 15 as I spent a short stint of time in care. Following this, I spent the next 4 years residing in various hostels. There were no counselling services to access at that time. The properties were not always sanitary. Safety wasn't always guaranteed. Age 17, I once woke up to a gun pointed at my face, which resulted in an emergency move to a boys' shared house, far away from friends and the little family I was then in touch with. During my time there, my younger brother and sister came to live with me as my mother was suffering from alcoholism. I was ushered into this responsibility doing whatever I could, experiencing degradation and such things so that I may continue to send my siblings to school for food, etc. I moved to my first flat via a housing association. I was in a studio flat for 8 years, during which time, after a robbery, a sexual assault, then becoming pregnant, an overdue termination of a baby at 6 months, a year of isolation, then the birth of my first child, I was operating on survival. I went to uni, unable to keep up with my work due to the confines of space, and realised that I was never going to be moved. I didn't have the confidence to face the resistance I was experiencing from my housing officer to fight. I felt like I deserved it as I had rent arrears at the time due to not wanting to engage with job centre employees who were particularly harsh and unreserved with their disdain of those on the side of the table that I would sit on. My housing benefit was cancelled. I took matters into my own hands in an attempt to boost my confidence and shake off the stigma of being a benefit bum. I knew I was responsible for changing my life and building a better life for my daughter. I moved to Croydon to a 2-bedroom, privately rented flat. My boyfriend at the time would turn out to be abusive, so I left there. I moved into another private rental, which was above the local housing allowance. I struggled to maintain the tenancy. The landlord's behaviour was unbelievable. I was receiving death threats. My property was entered without my consent. I was threatened with a knife on the side in my kitchen. The council wouldn't help when I went to them, and I was told the landlord needed to evict me through the proper channels. I was afraid for my life, and the lock was changed. I'd contacted the police were not helpful. This was my first experience with housing criminality, and I was illegally evicted. What followed was mishap after mishap with private landlords who would abuse the fact that I was on minimal income, desperate for housing, hiking up prices, moving into properties soon to be repossessed. It was chaos. The destabilization resulted in my first child having been affected by the moving. Behaviourally erupted when my son was born. I was terribly ill during my pregnancy, bedbound and unable to care well for my daughter with no support. I was in Becontree in Essex, housed temporarily by Kensington and Chelsea Council, who would then decide that I was not eligible for continued support as I had left my first flat. It was determined that that it was my last affordable address, and the judge ruled that I was intentionally homeless as I'd left my first flat. It was below the local housing allowance, and that if I do not find alternative accommodation, then they had a duty to only house my children, and if that is the case, then I should place them in care immediately. My children were with me in court to hear this. My daughter's behaviour declined, and following a few months with her dad, he put her into care. Her age at the time meant that she could decide not to return home. I cannot say much else on this at the time because of child protection laws. Broken and now looking after a toddler, I knew I had to find another tenancy before the eviction date was due, and I was afraid of ending up in another private rented sector disaster. A friend loaned me some money, and it took a while before I was able to be considered by a private landlord in Dringford. This property wasn't ideal. There was heavy disrepair, mice, water leaks, serious drafts. I moved from there after 2 years. I then relocated, taking another private tenancy in Enfield in a studio flat advertised for a single mother. The house was shared by an alcoholic, 3 other men who didn't live healthy lifestyles. The house was broken into, and there was another single mother. It was considerably run down, open brickwork, no central heating. For the first time, I contacted environmental health to where they enforced action for improvements. The landlords then, following the work being done, evicted everyone as they were then taking back the property. I was then advised to contact Enfield Council and present the Section 21. I was advised to look for a private landlord who accepts universal credit. I found one on open rent as the days were closing in. I went to view the property, which was listed as a 1-bedroom apartment. It was in fact an illegally converted garage. A garage. I had no choice but to move into this garage, where the shutters still remained on the side of the building. I liaised with Enfield Council, who agreed to pay a first month's rent, though the asking rent was too high. The landlady reduced it to satisfy the council, though said she would only give it to me if I agreed to sign another agreement with the remaining amount. I agreed. I was desperate and glad to still live in not too far proximity from my son's school, so as not to disturb his education given previous experiences. I had to adjust a chest-high amount of rubbish piled in the front of my door in the garden. I was told it was just random things left by a previous tenant. There was a 2-week delay before it was removed. Upon further alerting the landlady that rats are running riot in there, and due to the warm temperature was now starting to smell. Even though I was assured that it would be cleared before I moved in. Then the harassment started. Because I was living in a garage, I didn't have a letterbox. And I had numerous calls and messages late at night where my landlady would insist on bringing my mail to me. She lived 2 doors away, and because my address wasn't registered, my mail would go to her. She would accuse me of ignoring her if I didn't respond to her on WhatsApp or text immediately. I emailed her to state the inappropriate hours of contact. I asked for a letterbox and a clear sign that the address was my own. She declined. A week later, I returned home to find workmen on the roof. Debris on the inside of my flat and sky roofs were removed. I wasn't notified of the work to be done. Privacy was violated by workmen peering into the windows, particularly when I used the toilet. I kept on at the landlord. She ignored me. The following day, I arrived home to discover that the sky windows had been left uncovered overnight, and a chemical had been sprayed on the roof. It was so strong that it induced headaches and vomiting with myself and my son. It was so strong that it induced headaches and vomiting with myself and my son. Apologies. I would then have 2 visits to A&E as I couldn't breathe well. I later found out that I was using less than 50% of my lung capacity. I contacted environmental health. By the time anyone contacted me, the work was complete and the inspector said that he couldn't smell anything. I was there for only 6 weeks. I moved to a shared house temporarily, which wasn't easy. I now reside in Leytonstone. The 2 weeks after I've moved in, the landlady said that she's going to take back the property as she now wants to sell. I've had to report her to my local council. I basically moved into a work site. The electricity cuts out. There's faulty appliances that don't belong to me in the property. My washing machine is currently leaking. I have mice. I don't know too much else to say at this point. I'm strong. Yeah, I don't know how much stronger I'm expected to be to have a sound and affordable space to raise my son. I implore all who are decision makers to please consider the implications of the restricted methods used to determine who can receive help. Throughout my journey, there have been landlords taking advantage of me and making money from my misery, housing me and my child in a garage, changing the locks, illegally evicting me, death threats. I've been fighting all my life to keep a roof over our heads. I wasn't always on benefits, though this has exacerbated my anxieties. I suffer with complex PTSD. Change is the only option, and I need whoever can make this happen, please make it happen. Today, right now, I can't afford to wait any longer. Thank you.